Charlamagne the God just destroyed this podcaster on her own podcast. Now, the podcast I'm talking about is the Native Land podcast, and more specifically, Tiffany Cross. So, the last time we discussed the Native Land podcast, we discussed how they disrespected the Joe Budden podcast when talking about the Queen's Flip and Mark Lamont Hill beef or altercation they had. Joe Budden responded and destroyed them. But in Joe Budden's response to them, Joe Budden called them Charlottettes, essentially saying, yo, y'all are Charlemagne friends. We only know you guys to be Charlemagne friends. I guess Charlamagne the God decided he was going to come on their podcast to kind of correct the narrative that he's standing by their nonsense. So Charlamagne the God came on their podcast to essentially check them for disrespecting Joe Budden and essentially getting the backlash that was well-deserved. Let's do a quick recap of their beef with Joe Budden, just so everyone is caught up. On our last podcast, they discussed the Queen's Flip and Mark Lamont Hill beef. They said Mark Lamont Hill was an inmate on the Joe Budden podcast. He was being bullied. They were hostile to him. It was like Guantanamo for Mark Lamont Hill, how they was explaining it, all right? And they got all of this from a very short clip of Queen's Flip and Mark Lamont Hill arguing. So from that clip, they thought the Joe Budden podcast was bullying Mark Lamont Hill. They also said members on the Joe Budden podcast are dumb outside of Mark Lamont Hill, and they don't care about anything they have to say, and Mark Lamont Hill shouldn't be on that couch with them.
We say on this show, welcome home, and we mean that. Of course, Mark is welcome anytime. I don't know about the rest of them. So I just want Mark to know I'm praying for you, brother. You know that. And I want better for him. I think that he deserves to hold space with people who are at least more compassionate and more eager to learn from his perspective.
I'm not saying it's something wrong with engaging the flips of the world. I would never say, Andrew, Bakari, Angela, y'all should not engage the flips. I'm saying I, Tiffany, have no desire to engage the flips of the world. I don't choose to be in a conversation, but that's just not my ministry. I wouldn't be good at it. And I just have no desire. And yes, I do not respect everybody's opinion on everything. And yes, we respect each other's opinion here on most things, but there are some things. I mean, Bakari, if you came to me and was like, oh, your period coming, you got a cramp, this is what you need to do. I'm probably like, what are you basing that on, Bakari? Like, where did you get that from? Like, that's not necessarily your area of expertise. I
got that off Instagram.
My acceptance of her non-invitation becomes relevant, right? Like Angela, right? I can assure you, like, I've got over 25 years in this business. I can assure you, if you and I are in the same place, it's a mistake on my part. Like, I'm all for people saying who's invited and uninvited places, so I ain't mad at it. But we would never be in the same space. You, quote unquote, intellectuals seem to be pulling a lot from places that, again, like it said, you admittedly know very little about. It just comes off a way.
Yeah,
it comes off a way.
It's like if you put,
especially when you pretending especially when you pretending to do all of this super black kumbaya. I got a problem with that too. Mm-hmm. I got a problem with the people that masquerade as kumbaya, super black, all for the people, and will be the first one to tell you how we're different. I come on here every week and say we're less different than we all like. We just got different ideologies. But I'm not going to keep listening to people who in 25 years, I've never said the name Angela Rye. I don't give a fuck about nothing y'all talking about over there. I'm saying that respectfully.
So because of them jumping off the ledge, making an assumption about the Mark Lamont Hill and Joe Budden podcast dynamic, and essentially insulting the intelligence of Joe Budden podcast, Charlamagne the God decided he was going to come on and defend Joe Budden and confront them for what they did. Since Joe Budden is not intellectual enough to talk to them, Charlamagne the God was going to do it for him. And also because these are the people that Charlamagne the God essentially introduced to us. We wouldn't know these people if it wasn't for Charlamagne the God.
I agreed with Joe. You know, I felt like, it came off, very elitist, very Jack and Jill, very, I got my nose up at these Negroes. My biggest issue with it was, well, damn, a person who's an intellectual should look at the whole context of a situation before they have a conversation about it. I feel like, Andrew said one of the strongest points last week when Andrew was like, I don't watch this show enough to have an opinion about it. and then he said, but I trust Mark, being Mark to not to be in spaces where, he knows he needs to be in. And as I'm listening to the convo, I told Angela that even when she told me that y'all wanted to talk about it, it came up as a topic of discussion. I said, well, make sure you watch the whole thing in context before you just watch a clip of it and then, speak on it for the next 20 or 30 minutes. Because to me, that's what an intellectual should do, right? Like, that's what an intelligent person should do. An intelligent person should get the whole context of something before they comment on it, instead of watching like 2 or 3 minutes of something and then actually taking the clip out of context. Because if you watch the clip in context, Mark was actually wrong. If there's a right or wrong in the situation, Mark was actually the one who was wrong in that situation, so much so that he even came back and apologized, the next week. And the conversation just kind of made me feel a way like, damn, like that's how we look at each other.
I don't consider these people intellectuals. They call themselves intellectuals, but anybody who's an intellectual isn't calling themselves an intellectual, right? That's to be seen, not told. But because they perceive themselves as intellectuals, they look down and they talk down to the biggest podcast in this space, which is the Joe Budden podcast and other forms of podcasts. They critique it. Like, the majority of your demographic is watching Joe Budden, but they talk down on those other forms as if they're supposed to be the leaders of Black media. Now, Charlamagne the God says something very important. How can you call yourself an intellectual if you went off an assumption based on a clip? Because if you watched it in that particular clip, Queen's Flip wasn't overly tripping, to be honest. Like, Queen's Flip was not the agitator in that situation. Mark was, right? Now, so Tiffany Cross was who Charlamagne God was speaking to specifically, because she went off the road. She went crazy. The person that Charlamagne God is talking to specifically is Tiffany Cross. Now, Tiffany Cross is unwilling to listen. She's not trying to hear anything that Charlamagne God has to say. She is stubborn. She is, she's just absurd, right? Now, she had about a week to prepare for this interview, and she knew what Charlamagne God's complaint was, because Charlamagne God told her co-host he don't think that she did research when she talked about it. So after a week of preparing and watching other clips, she then came back to this episode and tried to get off that she actually did extensive research before the first podcast, even though it was evidence that she didn't understand what was going on based on her commentary on the situation.
My personal background aside, I want to say that as a journalist, before I bring up anything on this show, I want our viewers to know I have indeed done my due diligence. So I didn't just watch the clip. How I prepared for that segment, I didn't pay for Patreon, but I did read the transcript of what happened. I even understood the word in question that was tricky, was allude. I understood that the conversation was about payment discrepancy. I spoke to Mark before I did the segment. I looked at literacy rates before I did the segment. I watched a few clips, or not clips, but segments, different segments from Joe Budden's podcast before I did the segment. And I will say, I stand by what I said. My perspectives and opinions don't sway in the winds of public opinion. Sometimes the cheese will stand alone. I do think there is very much a toxic landscape that is fueled by a lot of podcast bros. But I definitely agree with you, Charlamagne. Before you have an interview with anybody, before you sit down and speak on something, I would advise anyone to be well informed, whether it's politics, sports, anything like that. And so I don't think that the issue was that the collective was not well informed. I don't think that was my perspective. I think the issue that a lot of people felt is they felt attacked. And so I want to be clear that I wasn't saying who was an intellectual and who was not. My perspective was there is an anti-intellectual movement ravaging the Black community. I also want to be clear that I was not saying that no one should talk to Flip or Joe Budden. Certainly somebody should. Someone should be reaching out to them. That's not my ministry.
Tiff, it's interesting. You say you like talking to the incarcerated. Like, who do you think the incarcerated are listening to? Like, the incarcerated are listening to things like the Joe Budden podcast. Like, they're listening to, places like the Breakfast Club. Like, that's who they're actually tuning into.
He proceeds to hear nothing that Charlamagne the God is saying. Charlamagne the God's only mission during this entire segment was to tell them, hey, if you believe you are an intellectual, you want to bridge the gap. Like, you want to go on these platforms like the Joe Budden podcast and others, and you want to bridge the gap. You're not too good for these platforms. She then ignores that and then goes on this super classist rant about how it's not her ministry. she has better things to do than to talk to the Joe Budden podcast, and those people, she don't respect their opinion, so she's not going to sit down with them. As if like her opinion like really holds water or weight, which just doesn't at all.
To me, what I find frustrating is when you are not receptive or curious. I don't need to talk to people wherever you are, whatever your background is. If you're not receptive or curious, then you are likely not my audience and I'm likely not yours. I am curious about things. I can learn from anybody, but I don't necessarily respect everybody's opinion. And I don't think all the people say I respect everybody's opinion. Use a lie. I don't believe that. There are people there. Go ahead.
Can you be intellectually curious without respecting everybody's opinion?
Yes. You looking at somebody who's intellectually curious without respecting everybody's opinion.
Because I consider myself intellectually curious, so I'm the type of person that I'm gonna hear you out. I may not want to hear you again, but I'm gonna at least take the opportunity to listen to you at least one time.
No, there's a gentleman by the name of Corey. He is a lovely person. He happens to be schizophrenic and homeless, and he's in the front of my building. And he has an opinion on everything. And I sit there and chat with Corey sometimes just because he's so nice and so sweet, and I give him bread because he likes to feed the birds. I don't respect Corey's opinion on anything. He got opinion on the financial systems and the banks and all the things that he wants to tell me about. I don't respect your opinion anymore. Now, you sound like a fool. And I'm giving you reason right there in real time, challenging you. But I can't fill a cup that's already full. So now, no, I don't respect your opinion. And Bakari said this is South Carolina saying, but I think all black folks say this. If I'm arguing with a fool from a distance, you can't tell the difference. I don't need to be where fools gather. If somebody else feels called to say no, it is my ministry to go inform, to go educate this particular group of people. I would never shit on that. That's just not even my way. I'm like, live and let live, go do it. That's just not what I choose to do.
I understand. I guess the issue comes, and I can't believe I'm on here defending the Joe Budden podcast, right? but I guess the issue is, I don't think fools go together at the Joe Budden podcast. I don't think anybody in that room...
I didn't say that, for the record.
Yeah, I don't think anybody in that room is a fool. And I also feel like, we should be happy that people like Mark Lamont Hill want to be on big black platforms. I think that's the biggest problem I have right now is that, we tend to knock, certain platforms when what we should be doing is infiltrating those platforms. I know everybody likes to, go at Stephen A. Smith. I want to see more black elected officials, more black politicians, more black spiritual leaders, more black activists, more black people with something to say about black issues go on platforms like Stephen A. Smith.
I'm not complaining about anyone having a large audience. I'm complaining about who his audience is. He has a large audience of mostly conservative white folks.
Charlamagne the God really puts her in a box. So she begins to go on this huge rant about how Stephen A. Smith audience is conservative, racist white folks, which I'll be real, when you go to the comment section of Stephen A. Smith's political video, it does look like a KKK rally. But when I say Stephen A. Smith's overall audience is conservative whites, I wouldn't go that far. But Charlamagne the God really puts her in a box here. And also, I want to point out the hypocrisy, because she goes on about how Queen Flip and others are not willing to listen. They're not willing, to take advice. They're not cooperative, so hence she don't want to talk to them. But the whole time her co-host gets really upset at her, as you're about to see, because the co-host has been trying to get other people to talk, and she's unwilling to stop talking and listen to her other co-hosts, and she hogs 15 to 20 minutes of the airtime straight. Now, Charlamagne the God puts her in a box because she begins to lie about the ratings of Stephen A. Smith's show. And Charlamagne the God calls her out on her hypocrisy, right? Wait, hold on. You just said... right? Journalists shouldn't give information without the facts, that these people are intellectually dishonest because they just spew and they don't do their research. Well, you're doing that right now.
And they are treating him. This is no diss to Stephen.
Do you have data to back that up, Tiffany? Do you have statistics that say Stephen A. Smith's audience is majority conservative white folks?
I do. Nielsen ratings, or his ESPN show, Nielsen ratings qualifies that.
Well, no, that's ESPN. I'm talking about his podcast, because most of the time when he's spewing political takes...
I don't know his podcast. I just know he built his audience on a majority of white people. So I don't, and I would love to dig into, and I'm happy to come on here next week, because I would love to somebody to prove to me that his audience is a majority of black people.
See, that's a feeling, but that's a fact. So the Does that make you anti-intellectual because you're spewing feelings instead of actual
No,
facts?
but it's not even. But it's not even. I'm going to respond to this. It's not even a feeling, though.
It's literally 5 minutes left in the conversation.
Okay, but I want to respond to what he said.
You guys haven't let anybody else weigh in
I'll
here.
weigh in, but I'm going to respond to this. He said that's a feeling or an opinion. Not necessarily. It's somewhat informed, because if you look at who his audience, how he built his audience, the suggestion that a majority of his audience would be comprised of Black people is not a well-informed one. It's logic to say most of his audience are white people. Are you suggesting that most of his audience are Black people?
I don't know what most of his audience is, but I know I started, reading Stephen A's columns when he was writing for the Philadelphia Inquirer, when he was covering Allen Iverson way back in the day. And then I followed him to Cold Pizza and First Take and everything else. I think that this new, political Stephen A with a conservative audience is relatively new. So I would, before these white people were talking about him, it was majority Black people in the barbershop that was talking about Stephen A. But I'm just talking about the audience in general. Like, you said Mark Lamont Hill shouldn't be on Joe Budden's show. Why? You said
Did I say he shouldn't be?
You actually said he should be on CNN.
Yes. So that's the difference between saying he should not be on Joe Budden.
That's where I cut it off at, bruh, because she's being dishonest. She know what she was saying, right? When you bring up the clip of Mark Lamont Hill arguing with Queen's Flip and you disparage the Joe Budden podcast, say they're bullying Mark, saying the podcast is dumbing down America, and then you say, man, Mark Lamont Hill should be on CNN. You know what you're saying. You're clearly saying he should be on CNN and not a platform as dumb as the Joe Budden podcast. But because she understands that, she's getting a lot of flack for this, right? For this elitist mindset, she's getting a lot of flack for it. Now she's trying to change it. Man, bro, I just hate that, bro. If you want to stand on it, bro. If you don't want to stand on it, bro, I can't take you seriously, man. Yeah, but I think Charlamagne God did a very good job at dissecting her and destroying her on her own podcast, man. All right. A lot of these intellectuals, man, to me, aren't really intellectuals, right? Like, they just love to bloviate hot air. Okay. But y'all let me know in the comment section, what do you guys think about this? Do you guys believe that they had a point about the Joe Budden podcast, or do you guys believe that Charlamagne God dissected her and these people are actually elitist and not intellectuals? Let me know, okay? And if you're still watching, click on this video right here somewhere on my screen to find out how T Grizzly just got exposed for snitching on some LA Crips. Click on this video right here to find out what I'm talking about. Also, if you want to get a head start on YouTube, I have a step-by-step tutorial on how I made $90,000 in 28 days. And I walk people through how to make their first $10,000 a month on YouTube, as well as hit 10,000 subscribers in 3 months, right? If you're interested, link is in my description, as well as one-on-one consultations, okay? I'm going to see you guys in the video on my screen. I'm out of here, folks. Peace.